All right, so next up, we have Doctor in the House, Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, and he was well known in the first series of Doctor in the House for reversing type 2 diabetes, not once, but twice. It's not just as simple as diet, and in this next 15 minutes, he's going to share with us what a root cause approach to type 2 diabetes looks like. Enjoy.
I want you to start getting used to the idea that when you think about food, I want you to start thinking about three things. There's three-way interaction between the food choices that you make, your gut bugs, and your immune system. They are intimately linked, and there is bi-directional communication between all three of those. So far, so good? So this is very, very important. And this is a great graphical illustration of how the amount of gut bugs changes as you go through the human GI tract. Where you start in the stomach, you don't have many at all. As you go down through the small intestine, the numbers keep going up. And the bulk of those gut bugs are down here in the colon. So what causes type 2 diabetes? I think we're all in agreement that it's insulin resistance is the pathology that's going on behind type 2 diabetes. But what causes insulin resistance? This is a brilliant paper from 2013. Have any of you heard of lipopolysaccharide? Yeah, a few of you. Let's just take a step back. Most of our modern non-communicable diseases that we're seeing are caused in some way by chronic inflammation. Okay, so very simply, acute inflammation, a good thing. Sprain your ankle, gets red, gets hot, gets swollen. Okay? It helps us heal. A few days later, a few weeks later, it is switched off. That is good. The flip side to that is chronic unresolved inflammation, where there are continuous triggers that put your immune system, and most of your immune system, as Michael shared with you, sits in and around your gut. And it just constantly triggers it, and they're like alarm signs for your body. So I'm talking about chronic unresolved inflammation. The bulk of it comes from your gut, and lipopolysaccharide is likely the triggering agent for the majority of it. So what is lipopolysaccharide? Well, I'm talking about gut bugs. Right? So very simplistically, the bacteria that live in your gut, you've got gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. And the gram-negative bacteria, on their coat, on their outer coating, they've got a component called lipopolysaccharide. If I was to get some lipopolysaccharide and inject it through your vein, you'd go into septic shock. Okay? That's how powerful it is. Now, the effects aren't quite as immediate and dramatic in your gut, but arguably long-term, they're very, very significant. And lipopolysaccharide is fine if it sits in your gut and doesn't come into your body. But the fact that our gut microbiomes are decimated compared to how they were means that actually there's an issue there where lipopolysaccharide is coming into the body and driving inflammation. And on a wider note, so this is why when we talk about food, many of you in here I know from interacting with on social media might be proponents of what is called a low-carb diet for type 2 diabetes. I've also had interactions, I know I can't see any of you, but I know it's always different seeing people than when you're interacting with them on Twitter. But I know that many of you also are not proponents of that approach. And the thing is, you can both be right. Because any diet that positively impacts your gut microbiome, right, and reduces lipopolysaccharide going into your body and triggering inflammation is likely to help you. Now, this is from 2013. I love this. About 75% of the food in the Western diet is of limited or no benefit to the microbiota in the lower gut. Remember, I said most of these, the microbiota just means the names of those gut bugs. The microbiome is the bugs plus their genome. Okay? So 75% has no value to our gut bugs. Most of it, comprised specifically of refined carbohydrates, is already absorbed in the upper part of your GI tract. And what eventually reaches the large intestine is of limited value, as it only contains small amounts of the minerals, vitamins, and nutrients necessary for maintenance of the microbiota. So just think about that for a minute. Because there's no doubt what is called a low-carb diet does seem to have therapeutic value for many of our patients. Is it that it's the carbs that have gone, or is it that the bulk of the junk food that we're now eating, right, are refined and processed carbs? So you cut those out, you improve the health of your gut microbiome, and you get better. I think it's that, but I would have given you a different viewpoint 5 years ago. This is how my thinking on this has evolved. Because you've got to recognize, and I know there's many low carbers here in the room, and I have utilized what is called a low carb diet. I personally don't like the term because I think we have demonized fat unfairly, and I think we run the risk of doing the same with another macronutrient. So I prefer to talk about the quality of food, but I have used what would be called that kind of approach. But you've got to recognize there are some people who are reversing type 2 diabetes using a low-fat diet. The Okinawans in Japan have got an 80% high-carb diet. They don't have diabetes. Right? So if it is just carbs, we cannot explain that. And if we have time, we'll touch on that later. I think it's very interesting. So I think it really comes down to the gut microbiome. A low-fat diet, the sort of plenty healthy, colorful, different plants, right, can have a very positive impact on the gut microbiome. A low-carb diet, when done well, can also, right? So instead of fighting about fat v carbs, I think there's more to it than this. I won't go through these. This is just reminding you, three-way interaction, food choices, gut bugs, immune system. Again, my take on food over sort of 16 and a half years in practice now is literally, it comes down to processing. And I think this clears up a lot of the macronutrient wars. There's a all good diets around the world, which have been shown to be associated with healthy outcomes, are minimally processed. Pretty much. Minimally processed whole foods, healthy microbiome, your immune system. You'll find out more about this in Mike's lecture. But once your immune system is working well in your gut, you switch off inflammation, right? And that has the downstream consequences on multiple different diseases. Contrast that with highly processed modern food, a disrupted microbiome, immune system completely unbalanced, sending out anti-inflammatory markers, anti-inflammatory cytokines around the body. I'd love to give you 2 hours on the science behind all of that, but it's all there. The science is all there, but we're not changing our therapeutic application with our patients. Low-grade inflammation and poor health. So I spoke a little bit there about what you were eating. What about when you're eating? Remember in Ayan's lecture, he spoke about the symptom web, and then thinking about these 4 pillars and how, what, and when. Well, if you're thinking about food with your patients, think about when they're eating. So, Dr. Ayan Panja, research scientist in the Salk Institute in California, he's been doing a ton of research on something called time-restricted feeding. This is from 2012. Now, this is in animals, and I will cover that in a second. And he showed that when you don't change what these animals ate, only when they ate, you significantly impacted obesity, fatty liver, high insulin levels, inflammation, and really importantly, the calories consumed were identical. The only change was the eating window. 2 years later, 2014, he shows again, if you can confine food access to 9 to 12 hours, well, let's just think about that for a minute. 12 hours. That's like having your breakfast at 8 a.m. and finishing dinner by 8 p.m. Pretty achievable for most of our patients, right? It ain't that hard for a lot of them. It can be used as a therapeutic intervention against obesity without, again, this paper talks about calorie restriction. I know many of us are proponents that, if we focus on the quality of our diets, we don't have to think about calories. That's certainly my own personal bias. I don't use calorie counting with my own patients. Again, if someone is using that and they're finding it useful, I have no problem with that. But it's not an approach I found useful. But it protects against metabolic diseases even when briefly interrupted at the weekends. So here's a beautiful graphic to illustrate it. Okay? You've got obese mice at the top. They're giving an obesogenic diet. And at the top, adult obese, and they can eat as much as they want, whenever they want. They become morbidly obese. Then their eating is time restricted. They stay obese, but they become fitter, just from changing their eating window. Then you've got lean mice. Again, given an even more obesogenic diet, ad libitum, those lean mice become obese, restrict their eating window, they become lean, fit mice. And then very finally, and this is where I think we've got application to the patients that we're seeing, you've got lean mice given an obesogenic diet on their work days in the week, time restricted, and at the weekend they can do what they want. It still has benefit. They're still lean, fit mice. It allows flexibility, right? So some of you might be asking, well, this is all great, but these are animals. Right, I get that. They are animal studies. And human trials are underway. And I got an email from Dr. Panda about 5 days ago or so saying, look, the difficulty in translating this to human trials has been funding. Who wants to fund this? Right? But they've got the funding from Europe, and these trials are underway. And he thinks in 2019, they're going to have human studies to publish. Right? But so far, it's looking good. And I ask you, right, does it not intuitively make a little bit of sense with our circadian rhythms? Can you tell me how this could possibly be harmful for our patients to try as an intervention? Yeah, I don't have a randomized controlled trial to give you. Okay? Do I use it? Absolutely. And have I seen it help patients? Yeah. It's not for everyone. So I just want to show you there is science, and we've got to start thinking outside the box if we're going to help our patients. Was that quite clear? Yeah? This is something basically just showing that in the presence of melatonin, which is the hormone that we know helps us sleep, 30% of us have got a variant of the melatonin receptor, which means that we don't manage insulin properly. So think about that for a minute, and at the time-restricted feeding stuff I was telling you. When we should be sleeping with our melatonin levels high, we're not so good with insulin. Right? This is only from last year. It's really interesting. It all starts fitting together. There are many different forms of exercise that have been shown to be beneficial in insulin resistance. And a lot of you will already know this. You know, we know that, as Ayan said, right, it's not inactivity. There's huge consequences. It accounts for 5% of global mortality, is a greater health risk than being overweight or obese. I think what we often neglect to talk to our patients about is muscle mass. So important in insulin resistance. The more lean muscle mass you've got, the more storage capacity you've got, the more insulin receptors you've got. And this is an observational study, but there's plenty out there showing that, you know, that basically higher muscle mass is associated with better insulin sensitivity. So it's just when we're talking about our patients about what they should be doing, we need to be very specific. And I'll show you that in the case studies. Exercise snacks. You've got your own exercise snack in as you move floor. And that was all intentional, of course. We made the whole thing up about the problems we're having. But you know, this is a great study, a very recent study showing dosing exercises, brief, intense exercise snacks before main meals is a time-efficient and effective approach to improve glycemic control in individuals with insulin resistance. If you have not read this paper, read it. It's brilliant. To your patients who haven't got time to go to the gym, right? They don't have the money. Actually, some of you will know I've got something called a 5-minute kitchen workout, and I do that with my patients, and I explain how they can do it, and I get them into that habit so that every time at dinner, they're knocking out 2 or 3 minutes of a workout in their kitchen. Because, this is a side note, but I've never been satisfied as a doctor giving patients advice, and they come back and they say to me, oh, I couldn't do it, I've not done it. I'm not of the opinion that, oh, they're not doing it, they're lazy. My opinion is I need to do a better job at giving them something that they can do, right? And that's the challenge for all of us, particularly in compressed time windows in consultations. The challenge is, can we give them something that's relevant to them and they feel they can do? And again, this is sitting versus standing, and how saying, you know, if you're sitting all day and you go to the gym in the evening, great, but actually breaking sitting with standing throughout the day may promote better glycemic control. That's remarkable. Can we outdo the effects of sitting all day by going to the gym? A lot of research is saying we probably can't, so we need to factor that in when we're seeing our patients. Sleep. Critical. I love this quote from the sleep researcher. If sleep does not serve an absolutely vital function, then it's the biggest mistake the evolutionary process has ever made. How many of you slept well last night? Not that many. I didn't, unfortunately. Again, this is another animal study, and we're going to further this understanding later in Mike's talk, but we can know that chronic sleep deprivation, which is endemic with our patients, it's endemic in modern society, increases gut permeability, it increases gut-driven inflammation, it increases visceral fat, leptin levels, the satiety and hunger hormones, and ghrelin, and it increases insulin resistance just from not sleeping. So if you're talking to your type 2 diabetic patients just about their diet, you're missing big pieces of the puzzle. And the way we're going to get them to prioritize sleep is if we prioritize it when we're talking to them. What happens when you don't sleep? Obstructive sleep apnea, short sleep duration, circadian misalignment. Think about how many shift workers there are in society now. What does it do? This changes your biology, right? This changes sympathetic nervous system activation, increases levels of catecholamines. The HPA axis increases levels of cortisol. Oxidative stress and reactive oxygen species, you're going to hear more about that with Mike. Inflammation, IL-6, TNF-alpha, changes in adipokines like leptin and adiponectin. Do we have a drug that does all that? Does anyone know a drug that does all that? Right. So the point is, this has real science behind it, but we've got to start applying it and prioritizing it with our patients. This is showing that sleep can be a treatment, and it can also help prevent things, okay? And there's also stress. Okay, we cover stress a bit later. The important point is stress absolutely plays a role with insulin resistance. And there's good science behind this. And the point of it is, like inflammation, we are well adapted for short periods of stress. The problem is when that becomes chronic. And stress comes in all manner of forms these days. To-do lists, emails, social media, go, go, go. No work-life balance. Who checks emails at the weekend? Work emails. A few of you are admitting to it. I do. That can be a stress. We've lost that downtime. So I just want you to be thinking about these things when you're seeing your patients. Are you familiar with Professor Roy Taylor's work from Newcastle? So he is showing that type 2 diabetes is reversible, and he's doing it with a very low-calorie diet, 600 calories liquid diet. He's showing some really good results. So what does that mean, right? Well, in this paper, he talks about it can now be understood to be a potentially reversible condition by substantial weight loss. But the point I'm trying to make, and these are just general overviews of diabetes, I'm not sure that's relevant at the moment, but the point I'm trying to make is there are multiple ways to use lifestyle to help your patients with type 2 diabetes, right? And you've got to find the right way for them. Because you know what? 5 years ago, although I didn't want to admit it, Roy Taylor's approach does work, right? I don't use it with my patients. I don't have access to someone who can implement that with them. I think you can get it a different way, but it looks as though all these different methods, if they're working for you, impact the same inflammatory pathways. And ultimately, Professor Taylor said it comes down to 1 gram of fat loss in the pancreas. But unfortunately, we don't have a workout yet that can just target fat loss in the pancreas. So it's about trying to find the different methods that work.